All right, so you're thinking about getting a new phone. And like many people out there, you're probably wondering, iPhone or Android?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it?
It's a big decision. I mean, you're going to be using this thing every day, multiple times a day, probably. So we're here to help you figure out which platform is right for you. We're calling this a deep dive.
A deep dive, exactly.
We're going to use some insights that we got from a recent Gadget Fixers episode.
Yeah, Gadget Fixers had some great points.
By the end of this deep dive, you'll know all the key differences
Yeah.
between iOS and Android.
And you'll be able to choose the platform that really fits your needs.
Exactly.
We'll be covering everything from usability to customization to security to apps and, of course, the price.
All the things that matter. So let's start with first impressions. How easy are these phones to use right out of the box? What about the interface? Gadget Fixers really emphasized how Apple's iOS is all about, that sleek, consistent design.
It is very sleek.
Everything's where you expect it to be.
Like walking into a perfectly organized store.
Right.
Everything's just laid out so nicely.
Easy to find what you need.
Super user-friendly.
Especially for people who maybe aren't as tech savvy.
Exactly. They just want something that works.
Without having to think too much about it.
Exactly.
Now, Android is a little bit different.
Yeah. Android takes a different approach.
Gadget Fixers described it more like a bustling marketplace.
I like that analogy.
You've got all these different vendors.
You got Samsung doing their own thing, Google with their Pixel phones,
Yeah.
OnePlus mixing things
It's a
up.
buffet of choices.
You really have a lot of options with Android.
Which is exciting, but could it also be overwhelming for some people?
Potentially, yeah. Imagine someone who's used to that clean Apple aesthetic, and then suddenly they're faced with all these widgets and launchers and the ability to customize pretty much everything.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It can be.
So it sounds like iOS keeps it simple and predictable, while Android lets you really explore different looks and feels.
I think that's a good way to put it.
Okay, so let's talk about that exploration. Let's talk about customization.
This is where Android really shines.
Gadget Fixer said you can even change the entire launcher.
The launcher, yeah.
Which is basically the whole home screen experience.
Exactly. You can make it look completely different.
Wow.
And then there were the widgets.
Those little interactive boxes of information.
Yeah, you can go crazy with widgets on Android.
So Android is for the tinkerers, the people who love to personalize every detail.
Definitely.
iOS is more like, here's a beautiful phone, enjoy it.
Yeah. Apple has a very specific vision for how their phones should look and feel.
Right.
But iOS has made some concessions towards customization. You can use widgets now, and you can adjust your layout a bit.
But it's still not as in-depth as Android, is it?
No, not even close.
It's like adding a few throw pillows to a designer sofa versus reupholstering the entire thing.
That's a great analogy.
All right, so we've talked about how easy these phones are to use and how much you can customize them. Now let's get serious for a second. Let's talk about security and privacy.
Yeah, this is a big one.
Gadget Fixers really dug into this.
And for good reason. It's a top concern for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
So with security, Apple has basically built a fortress around iOS.
Fortress.
Yeah, they've got very tight control.
Because it's a closed ecosystem, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Apple controls every app that goes into its app store.
And they have strict rules about what those apps can and can't do.
Very strict.
So you're less likely to encounter malware.
Much less likely. They even use something called sandboxing.
Sandboxing.
Yeah, it basically keeps apps isolated from each other.
So if one app goes rogue, it can't mess with the others.
Exactly. It's like each app is in its own little bubble.
That's reassuring.
It is.
And then there's Apple's overall stance on privacy.
They've made it a core part of their brand. They have features that limit how much data apps can collect about you.
That's good to know. Now, what about Android? How does it stack up in terms of security?
Android has been playing catch-up.
Catch-up.
Yeah, it's an open system.
Meaning you can download apps from anywhere.
All right, not just the Google Play Store.
So it's potentially riskier.
It can be.
Like wandering off the main street into some shady back alleys.
Yeah, you have to be more careful with Android. But Google is working hard to improve security.
In what ways?
They're adding more granular permission controls, so you can choose exactly what information each app gets access to.
Okay.
And they're pushing security updates more frequently.
That's good. So it sounds like iOS might have the edge in security right now.
Probably. But Android is definitely taking it seriously.
Okay, good to know. Now let's talk about something a bit more fun. Apps.
Apps are where it's at.
Gadget Fixers pointed out that if you want the hottest new apps, especially in social media or creative fields, iOS is often the place to be.
It's true, those trendy new apps everyone's talking about, they tend to launch on iOS first.
Why is that?
Well, part of it is that App Store vetting process we mentioned. The higher bar for quality,
Right.
you're less likely to find a buggy mess on the App Store.
Okay, so iOS is like the exclusive club where you get the VIP treatment, and Android is more like a massive festival.
With stages for every genre.
I like that.
The Google Play Store has a huge library of apps, often with more niche and specialized options.
Okay.
But because they're not as strict about who gets in, you might run into some duds along the way.
So it's a trade-off quantity versus curation.
Exactly.
All right, so iOS is all about that curated experience, while Android lets you explore the vast wilderness of the app world. Okay, last thing for this part of the duck dive. How well do these phones play with other devices?
That's a great question. And it's an important one for a lot of people.
I think so too.
So this is where that Apple walled garden comes into play again.
The walled garden.
Yeah, if you're already using a MacBook, an iPad, or an Apple Watch,
Yeah.
an iPhone just fits right in.
Everything syncs up perfectly.
Everything, files, photos, notes, it's all there.
You can even airdrop stuff between devices instantly.
That's right.
So it's like having a perfectly choreographed dance between all your Apple gadgets.
Right.
Now, what about Android?
Android integrates well with Google services, of course. And you can connect it with devices from various brands.
Okay.
But it might not feel quite as unified as that Apple experience.
So it's more like a jam session with talented musicians from different bands.
I like that analogy.
It can sound amazing, but it might not always be perfectly in sync.
Right.
All right, so iOS is the tightly knit family, and Android is the open-minded friend group,
That's a good way to think about it.
welcoming all kinds of devices.
Exactly.
So that's it for this part of our duck dive, but stick around because there's more to come.
We'll be right back.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground: usability, customization, security apps, even how well these phones play with other gadgets. But there's more to the story, right?
Definitely.
What about the stuff that happens behind the scenes, like updates and all that?
Yes, updates.
Gadget Fixers had some interesting points about that.
Yeah, updates aren't always the most exciting topic,
Right.
but they're super important.
They keep your phone running smoothly.
Exactly. They patch up security holes.
And sometimes they even bring cool new features.
It's like giving your phone a regular tune-up.
So when it comes to updates, Apple is known for taking really good care of its users.
They do.
Gadget Fixers mentioned that iPhones often get updates for 5 years or even longer.
It's true, even older models.
Wow.
Apple really goes the extra mile to keep those iPhones humming along.
So with an iPhone, you can pretty much buy it knowing that it'll be supported for years to come.
Exactly.
No need to worry about it becoming obsolete overnight.
Right.
But what about Android? Is it the same story there?
Well, it's a bit more complicated with Android.
How so?
Google's own Pixel phones are the stars of the show. When it comes to updates,
Okay.
they get the latest Android versions quickly and consistently.
But what about all the other Android phones out there? There are tons of different brands and models.
Right, and that's where things get tricky.
Okay.
It really depends on the manufacturer.
So some are better than others.
Yeah, some of the higher-end Android phones. From the big brands like Samsung, they'll usually get updates for a few years, maybe 3 or so.
Okay.
But budget phones or phones from smaller brands, they might not be so lucky.
So they might only get one major update.
Maybe or even none at all.
Wow. So it's a bit of a gamble with Android.
It can be.
You could get lucky with a brand that's committed to updates, or you might end up with a phone that gets left behind.
Exactly. It's definitely something to research before you buy.
Okay, good advice. So if updates are top priority for you, iOS might be the safer bet.
Probably.
But if you're on a tight budget, or you tend to switch phones every couple of years anyway, then the update situation on Android might not be a deal breaker.
Right.
Okay, now let's talk about something that's often on everyone's mind when making this decision: the price tag.
Ah, the price.
This is where things get interesting, because Apple and Android have very different approaches.
They do.
Gadget Fixers didn't shy away from this topic at all.
No, they didn't.
They pointed out that iPhones tend to be more expensive up front, especially the brand new models.
That's true. Apple products are known for their premium pricing.
Yeah, they're going for that high-end luxury feel.
Exactly.
But there's a reason for that price premium, right?
There is.
It's not just about the brand name.
Right. iPhones tend to hold their value very well over time,
So you can usually resell an iPhone for a decent price.
even after a couple of years.
Okay, so even though you might pay more initially, you could potentially recoup some of that cost down the road.
Exactly.
And then there's that long-term software support we talked about.
Right.
The fact that iPhones get updates for so long means you can use them for longer before feeling the need to upgrade.
Exactly.
So in a way, that higher initial price can translate into more years of use.
Which can actually make it a good value in the long run.
That's a really good point. It's not just about the sticker price, but the overall cost over the lifetime of the device.
I think that's a really important consideration.
Now, Android takes a very different approach.
It does.
There's a huge range of Android phones available at all different price points.
You can find super affordable budget models that cost a fraction of what an iPhone would cost.
That's great because it makes smartphones accessible to a much wider range of people.
Absolutely.
Not everyone can afford or wants to afford a top-of-the-line flagship phone.
Right.
And you can also find high-end Android phones that rival iPhones in terms of price and features.
Definitely.
So it really comes down to your budget and your priorities.
It does.
With Android, you have options.
Lots of options.
You can go for a budget-friendly phone, or you can splurge on a premium device.
Exactly.
It's all about finding the right fit.
For your needs in your wallet.
I think it's amazing how both iOS and Android have managed to be so successful,
It is.
even though they have such different philosophies.
They both cater to different types of users.
And they both offer unique advantages.
And it's great for consumers because we have so much choice.
I agree. Competition is good.
It
It
is.
pushes everyone to innovate and improve. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's take a moment to recap what we've learned.
Okay.
Good idea. We started by talking about updates and software support.
Right. Crucial for keeping your phone running smoothly.
And securely, for years to come.
Yes.
Apple really shines in this area.
They do.
Then we talked about the price difference between iOS and Android.
Right. iPhones are generally pricier upfront,
But they hold their value well.
and they can potentially last longer because of those extended updates,
And Android offers a vast range of prices.
making smartphones accessible to pretty much everyone.
Okay, now before we move on to our final thoughts and takeaways, let's quickly revisit some of the key points we covered in the first part of our deep dive.
Okay. Sounds good.
We talked about how iOS prioritizes simplicity and uniformity in its interface.
Right. That clean Apple aesthetic.
And Android embraces flexibility and choice.
Lots of options.
We saw how Android offers a level of customization that iOS just can't match.
Yeah, you can really make an Android phone your own.
And we dug into security and privacy,
It's a big one.
Apple's closed ecosystem and strict app vetting process. Give it an edge in that department.
For sure.
We even compared the app libraries
iOS with its curated selection.
and Android with its massive diverse catalog.
Something for everyone.
And we wrapped up that first part by talking about those voice assistants.
Siri on iOS and Google Assistant on Android.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, but there's one last piece of the puzzle we need to discuss.
The big question.
How to make the decision that's right for you.
Exactly.
So stay tuned, because in the final part of our deep dive, we'll be sharing some key takeaways and final thoughts that will hopefully leave you feeling confident and ready to choose the perfect smartphone for your needs. All right, so we've really gone deep, haven't we? iOS and Android.
Yeah, we've seen how they work, what they're good at,
What they're not so good at.
their strengths, their weaknesses.
All those little details that matter,
Right.
from the way they look and feel to how they handle security and privacy, and of course, those all-important apps.
And don't forget those voice assistants.
Yeah, they're becoming more and more essential, aren't they?
They really are.
So now it's time for the big question. The one we know you've been waiting for.
Drumroll, please.
Which one is better?
iPhone or Android?
It's the ultimate showdown.
The battle for smartphone supremacy.
But here's the thing, and Gadget Fixers made this point really well. There isn't a single right answer.
Nope, there's no clear winner.
It's not about declaring a champion.
Right.
It's about understanding that both platforms have their own unique strengths and weaknesses.
They appeal to different types of people.
And what's better really depends on what you value.
Exactly, your needs or preferences.
It's like buying a car.
Okay, I like this analogy.
You wouldn't just walk into a dealership and pick a car at random, would you?
No way.
You'd think about what you need it for.
Right, how many passengers will I be carrying?
What kind of driving will I be doing?
And of course, my budget.
Exactly. Choosing a smartphone is kind of like that.
It is.
You have to consider your own lifestyle.
Your priorities.
So if you want a phone that just works,
Right out of the box,
minimal fuss, maximum security.
iOS might be the way to go.
But if you love to tinker
Customize every little detail.
and maybe save a bit of money in the process,
Android could be a better fit,
it's about finding the phone that fits your life.
not just your tech specs.
Maybe you value simplicity and elegance.
iOS, with its sleek interface and curated app store.
Might feel like home.
But if you thrive on options and flexibility,
That ability to really make your phone an extension of yourself.
Android could be your perfect match.
And here's something else to keep in mind. Gadget Fixers touched on this briefly. The tech world is constantly changing.
It moves so fast.
What's cutting edge today might be old news tomorrow.
It's true.
So while this deep dive has given you a solid foundation,
Starting point.
don't be afraid to stay curious and keep exploring.
Read reviews, watch videos.
Even try out different phones if you can.
Hands-on experience is always valuable.
The more informed you are, the better equipped you'll be to make the right choice.
Not just today, but for years to come.
And most importantly, remember this. Technology is a tool.
It is.
It's supposed to make your life easier, more enjoyable, more connected.
That's the goal.
So don't get bogged down in the hype.
Or the fanboy wars.
Choose the platform that empowers you.
To live your best digital life.
That's the perfect way to put it.
I try.
We hope this deep dive has given you the clarity and confidence you need to navigate the exciting world of smartphones.
It's a jungle out there.
But you're now equipped with the knowledge to survive and thrive.
Exactly.
And if you still have questions, or you just want to share your thoughts on the epic battle of iOS versus Android,
Which we all secretly love.
don't hesitate to reach out.
We love hearing from you.
We're always here to help you make sense of the ever-changing tech landscape.
Until next time.
Stay curious, stay informed, and keep exploring.